Joy Ditto, President and CEO of the American Public Power Association, and I'd like to welcome you to Public Power Conversations. In recent years, we've seen increased interest from communities around the country in exploring a transition to not-for-profit, community-owned public power. This process, sometimes called municipalization, is underway in various stages in several places around the country. Here to discuss this trend and the municipalization process is John Coyle. Mr. Coyle is a managing partner with the law firm Duncan & Allen in Washington, D.C. He's a veteran of electric utility law with expertise in wholesale market issues and transactional law. In his 30-plus years with Duncan & Allen, he has been involved with or consulted on several municipalization efforts. Thank you so much for joining us, John. I have some questions great, thank you. I have some questions to guide the conversations, but we're free to wander off as we move forward and into other questions and topics, wherever the conversation takes us. That's the fun part of this format. So let's get to it. All right, in your experience, why do communities explore public power? What are the benefits? And can it derive benefits simply from embarking on exploration? Can a community derive benefits simply from embarking on the exploration?
Let me start with the first question first. I think that the best explanation of why communities seek to take over the utility operations, electric utility operations within their territory, has its roots in Franklin Roosevelt's famous Portland speech back in September, I think it was, of 1932, where Roosevelt actually did a very good summary of the common law and monopolies, and his issues with regulation of utilities, which he had a fair bit of experience as governor of New York, and came up with this famous analogy that the withdrawal of the franchise and the takeover of the utility was, in his words, a birch rod to be kept in the cupboard most of the time, but to be brought out when the child, the investor-owned utility that's incumbent serving the community, doesn't listen. And so it is sort of the ultimate customer discipline, if you will. And I think that's what drives people to it. Your other question was, can it have a value? Can the process of municipalization have a value to a community even when they decide not to proceed? And I think the answer is yes. In exploring the economics, the technical, the legal intricacies of forming and owning your own utility, requires a fair bit of energy and commitment just to do the exploration part. But it often occurs that the exploration part produces happy results, in the sense of you may realize you were not as angry as you thought you were at the incumbent, or you may succeed in inducing changes in the incumbent's behavior without the need to go through the process of acquiring your own utility system. Whether that's lower rates or more responsiveness to issues of concern to the community. Decarbonization is a big one these days. So yeah, there are benefits, intangible benefits, that arise from pursuing the process, even if you don't go all the way to establishing and owning your own utility.
Yeah, that's great. And sometimes just doing that assessment can be very helpful for a community to understand the pros and cons of their existing utility as well. So, but when a community does decide that this assessment's important and to explore the public power option, what's typically the first thing that they do?
So typically, when somebody approaches us, we recommend that they do a preliminary feasibility study, and that's an examination of the technical, economic, and legal issues that would confront the establishment of a municipal utility. Every state's laws are different to some extent on the ability of an individual municipality to pursue this path. Every technical situation is different in terms of what your likely utility resources are. And of course, the economics can be critical, since this is not an inexpensive or easy undertaking. And at least in the old days, the margins between what it would cost to have a municipal utility and what it would cost to remain with the incumbent were substantial. Not so much anymore these days. But
So, so after they've taken this first step, is the first step the key to a successful municipalization effort, or what is kind of the key ingredient or the secret sauce to really get to that final municipalization that really we all want them to achieve as public power supporters?
now let me put my geezer hat on and tell you a story that one night, my law partner Greg Ottinger and consultant we were working with, John Courtney, out of Findlay, Ohio. We're driving from Findlay to Clyde, Ohio, for one of innumerable meetings about Clyde's municipalization, which was successful, by the way. And somehow the conversation came around to what is that secret sauce, and so we coined this expression that there were 4 elements to a successful municipalization: the spread, the bread, the head, and the lead. What that means in short order is that the spread is a quantifiable business proposition, a business case for forming your own utility. As I said, in the days before open access transmission and wholesale markets, it was, where you had strict generation monopolies. Sometimes the difference between one wholesale power supplier and another could be sufficient to finance construction of a new distribution system. These days, the spread, as I suggested earlier, is often other than purely economic. The city of Boulder's municipalization effort was largely driven by a desire to decarbonize their electricity supply. So anyway, the spread. The bread, it's going to be an expensive process. It takes financial backing. Even the exploration is not cheap, because you need the legal, technical, and financial expertise to give yourselves good guidance. The head is committed local leadership. You cannot rely on outside expertise to create the momentum in the community to keep the process going, and it's often a lengthy process. And so you need dedicated, committed, bright people to run the process. And finally, lead, you need to be prepared for combat as you do this, not in a literal sense, obviously, but legal, technical, regulatory conflict with the incumbent utility, which seldom wants to give up its position peacefully. So that's the secret sauce, if you will.
I love that. And, one of the things that it just might be helpful to insert here is when, as APPA representing public power throughout the country, we do sometimes get asked by communities considering public power to weigh in and to provide some expert analysis or just examples from around the country of how public power works. And we're very happy to do that. But as you said, really the impetus needs to come from the community, and particularly strong leaders in the community who can see that value proposition and can really push for it through some of those challenges that you delineated. And I love that. I will use it myself in the future. So if you don't mind, John.
No, I don't have a copyright on that one.
Okay, good. So how long, getting back to a little bit more nitty gritty, how long does the typical feasibility study take? And then, sort of a second part to that question, how about the typical successful municipalization effort? So how long does the initial feasibility study take? And then how long does the actual final process take in your estimation?
Usually, the feasibility study proceeds in two parts. I said there was a preliminary feasibility study where you examine the technical, financial, and legal issues and decide whether there is a business case for municipalization that's worth pursuing. We typically then recommend that people do a more detailed feasibility study, because once you um, start with the preliminary, all sorts of objections to what you're doing are likely to surface, perhaps from inside the community, certainly from your incumbent utility, and you need to come up with answers for those issues. So, between the first phase, we typically say 4 to 6 months. The detailed feasibility study, probably another 6 months or so, as to running down the answers and formulating your business case. And then the municipalization effort itself, I think I have never done a detailed study, and I think it's not. I wouldn't know how to generalize it. I'll give you some examples and say that, at least in my experience, it's been the process typically takes on the order of 8 years. I remember somebody asked me to do a timeline for the Messina municipalization in Messina, New York, back in the late 70s, early 80s, and I was surprised that it had taken as long as 8 years from start to finish. We were working on Boulder since 2012, and one other in my experience, although it took a somewhat different path, was Electrical District 3 in Pinal County, Arizona, which meandered along, I guess, again, about 8 years, from 2001 to 2009, before we finally took the transfer of the bulk of the customers from Arizona Public Service. Clyde, Ohio, was shorter. Clyde was probably 3 to 4 years, if I'm remembering correctly. An unusual circumstance. One thing you want to look for when you're thinking about doing this is a friendly industrial customer who stands to benefit from your efforts, because that kind of momentum is a big boost to the community's effort to form its own utility. And Clyde had that.
Well, and I can sort of see, if you have, that type of process, it might be multi-year in nature, with, maybe perhaps locally elected officials changing every few years, and maybe having that consistent entity within the community. Again, that leadership, the head.
Yep.
So, you need the lead too, but that, I think that's important. It's an important component, as you said, and perhaps that's an industrial customer or another commercial customer standing to benefit from those, from the public power model. I also, just in thinking about our industry in general, it's many of our projects and many of the things we do as public power, but also in the rest of the industry, takes multiple years, right? So it's not that unusual that something, because these are significant assets, these are significant long-term investments that we're talking about here, and really a gem that the community could derive from putting public power in place, that could be around for decades, and should be.
Sure.
Because, as you know, many municipal utilities have been around over 100 years. And so that asset for the community does need to be evaluated fully. And I think, and again, most of them hopefully will choose to go the public power route. But again, it's appropriate to take that amount of time.
It's a big investment that has big returns. So
absolutely,
you want to be careful. Yeah.
Absolutely. You said it better than I could.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give officials in communities, some of these locally elected or appointed officials who are considering municipalization? What's your kind of top line advice for them?
Understand the business case. Um, and surround yourself with expertise that you trust. Okay. These are working relationships that, as we have discussed, are going to be in place for long periods of time and will undergo substantial stresses. So, trying to remember who said it. First, be sure you're right, then go ahead. And surround yourself with the best people that you can. That includes, by the way, the resources in your own community, your neighbors and community leaders. Again, your industries and your businesses need to support this. I'm trying to remember whether this was the appropriate place for my pitch for Charlie Munger. Because we had spoken offline, one of the things that I always tell people, there's a speech by Charlie Munger, who people who don't know who he is still at the age of 90 some odd. Warren Buffett, second in command at Berkshire Hathaway, and Charlie, that was a graduate of Harvard Law School, gave a speech at the Harvard Law School commencement in 1995 called "The Psychology of Human Misjudgment." And his point was that over the course of his career, he had made an awful lot of money understanding the various manifestations of human misjudgment, the reasons that people make mistakes, or that people are persuaded on the basis of erroneous propositions to do something or to not do something. Anyway, that's one I always recommend that people read and internalize. Charlie, I think, itemized something like 38 different species of human misjudgment, and if you start down this path, you will run into most of them. The other piece of advice I'd give people to internalize is that, to the extent that it's possible, you should try your best to avoid interacting with the regulatory community. Do not put yourself in a position where whether you go forward or not is at the mercy of a state utility regulatory commission or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or the courts. It's not that these tribunals don't mean well, they do. They're doing the best they can by their own lights. The problem is that the power of inertia and the power of incumbency are substantial, and particularly in the regulatory community, since municipal utilities are generally subject to a more light-handed form of regulation. People who regulate for a living tend to see us as a challenge or a threat, and so the more you devote your capitalization to the acquisition of assets, and the less you devote your capitalization to litigation, the better off you're going to be. That's advice that's contrary to my interest, by the way, but I think it's sound based on a lot of experience.
Well, thank you for that. And I did read that it's Charlie Munger, right? Mr. Munger's speech that you recommended before when we talked before this filming. And it's very interesting. It sort of makes you wonder how we ever make the right decisions somehow, because we are so subject to persuasion and sometimes persuasion in the wrong direction for our best self or for our own self-interest. So it's kind of like, again, it's sort of positive when you see some of these municipalization efforts come to fruition in the first place. It's pretty impressive, frankly. So any other sort of parting lessons learned, parting advice about municipalization efforts that you've been in, or anything you want to convey to the audience at this point?
Don't be discouraged. Again, it is a business proposition. Like many business propositions, it may take directions that you didn't anticipate when you got started. Be open to that, but always be sure that you understand what it is you want to achieve and remain committed to achieving it. I think that will solve a lot of the problems. Not to flog Charlie too much, but I think what he would tell you, I can't speak for him. He's a lot smarter than I am, but if you understand that business case and you stick to the business case, then you are, a lot better off than somebody who is reacting to fear or greed or some other emotion that really clouds your business judgment in the situation. So understand the business case, stick to it, be flexible, be ready to react quickly and forcefully as necessary, I think is the best advice I could give.
That's wonderful, John. And we talk actually internally at APPA sometimes about how we get into our feelings, and when we're talking about our own programs and activities. And it's good advice to look at the facts, look at the data, look at the business case, and try to put feelings aside as much as possible as you move into these discussions. So thank you. With that, I just really appreciate your time. It's so great that you're able to be here with us, and again, have a wonderful day, and we'll hopefully talk to you soon, and look forward to the next public power conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Joy.